Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this first session of the conference dedicated to AI. And I want to start with a question. Raise your hand if you feel more comfortable with the mechanics of AI after this first keynote. Okay, I found it quite enlightening. Probably because I realized the scope of knowledge, of the knowledge that is necessary to understand what's happening with AI. So let's set the scene for this first session. In 2022, more or less, 2022, I suppose all of us, we realized something was happening. Something was happening. Most of us, maybe we had already heard about AI, at least to some extent, but suddenly it was there. So as artists, we suddenly realized we had been practicing, creating, rehearsing, performing, and there was some kind of stowaway student in the room listening to us, learning from us. And suddenly there was an expert, omniscient expert, who knows everything. Things that it took years for us to acquire. Things that meant hard work, hours of practice. And suddenly there was someone who was there behind our back, learning everything from us, from our creations. And maybe who was already better than us at doing our own job. So we all started panicking. And we started to use words like content theft, unauthorized reproduction, job losses, etc. And trying to find the adequate response to this new challenge. Trying to design policies to preserve creativity, to preserve jobs, etc. So what we're going to try to do during this session is maybe with the same purpose as the keynote before. We try to have everyone have a minimum level of understanding of what happens under the hood, because we cannot design a relevant policy unless we have a minimum understanding of the mechanics of AI. So let me introduce our two speakers here. We have Yiannis Stathopoulos from Microsoft and Dimitris Kalocheretis from Value Solutions. And I will ask you to introduce yourself, tell a bit more to the audience about who you are and where you come from.
Thank you, Benoit. Kalimera. I must say that after the first session, I feel like a bug. I mean, I thought I knew things, but this was a bit much more, actually. So I'm Yiannis Stathopoulos. I'm working for Microsoft for the last 19 years. That's not even 20. I'm a CTO for South Europe. That is 17 countries in South Europe. And I have a background of software architecture and building things. My kid tells me that I'm not the real architect, the one that makes buildings and stuff. I'm the other stuff of architect. So nice being with you.
Thank you, Benoit. It's really great to be here with all of you. I'm Dimitris Kalocheretis, and I'm the head of IT and development for APOLLON, the organization of Greek musicians. And we have also implemented a few AI applications to facilitate the operations of the organization.
Thank you. So I tried to organize this session in different sections. We'll try with some form of introduction to put the context, and then we will address the training phase, what we generally describe as the input. Then we'll address the output, the generation. We'll touch upon hardware, what is required in terms of hardware to generate these contents, analyze the existing contents and generate new ones. try also to touch upon novelty, creativity. What does it mean when we talk about AI? Can there be any form of novelty? And maybe if we have the time, we'll also try to get some ideas of the cost structure of AI in general. So my first question would be, in 2022, 2023, when we all started to realize what was happening and all the AI models became available at once, the general public had the impression that AI was just created overnight, and ChatGPT was suddenly available to everyone. So you could ask questions, ask ChatGPT to maybe draft a text for you, etc. And that was not possible just a few months before. And that happened for all the models. They all became available at the same time. So what happened? Why is that? Was there anything before that already existed? Or was it just created overnight and suddenly you have all the competitors arriving on the market together? So who wants to start?
Okay. Artificial intelligence goes back to 1950s. At that point, we had not completed the idea of computer yet. So we were thinking, how can a machine think? And the only model that we had was the archetype of the human brain. And based on that, there were some thoughts that they could simulate the human brain using wires, using cables. Of course, it would be a very expensive and enormous operation to do that. But they tried a few simpler things. And theoretical studies on artificial intelligence started at that point. Going forward, there were periods of winter for artificial intelligence because the hardware that we had could not facilitate the computation needs of artificial intelligence. A model like ChatGPT has somewhere around 1 trillion of connections between neurons. So it is very computational, expensive, and intensive. Now, around 2010, the mathematical processors of modern computers, the VGA cards, the graphical processors, started to become significantly better, and they could accommodate bigger loads of computational mathematical data. And at that point, artificial intelligence started to exit the winter and enter in the spring of its era. Later on 2017, we had a very big change because the transformer model broke into public, and it could accommodate a few problems that the prior architectures could not easily accommodate. And after that, the expansion of artificial intelligence was really very rapid. And we came to 22 that first some imaging models like Mid-Journey and Stable Diffusion broke in the summer to the public, and later on, November, the ChatGPT. And it says something that the architects of ChatGPT say that the industry was surprised by how much better the model became when we gave it more parameters, more neurons, and more connections between the neurons of the system.
So what you mean, in short, is that the computational resources was a determining factor for AI to develop rapidly over the past few years. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
The evolution of hardware
Okay.
made possible to have this expansion of AI.
Yiannis.
A couple of points that's to extend on what Dimitris is mentioning. So the first point is that, as Dimitris mentioned, AI models existed since 1956, so they were somewhere in the lab, hidden actually, that only for researchers. So one thing that changed was the commercialization and the democratization of models. So models became public, went out with the form of the chat, and that was appealing in a way that everybody could use these models in an everyday life. And the second thing that changed is that, as Dimitris mentioned probably, is that the architecture has changed and the ability to have parallel computations and improve speed and ingest vast amount of data sets in order to train the models better. And the third and the final part probably is that we soon discovered that these models can collaborate with us and extend what we are doing, because that's why they exist, not replace, just extend and collaborate. And we soon discovered that we can use them in our everyday life and do things with them and perhaps speed up our work.
Thank you. Now, there is an aspect that has triggered a lot of discussions in the creative community. I've been part of many forums where we have discussed extensively about the use of existing content. So it's about data that we use as an input. Of course, we understand that to develop, establish, and refine its model, AI needs access to quality data, very large amounts of quality data. And of course, it started to do it quite a long time ago, before we were even aware of what was happening. That's why I was earlier talking about a stowaway student doing all the job without us knowing. So what exactly happens when AI trains? What is AI training? How are data used for training? What does it mean to train from data? Are these data copied and reproduced somewhere? Are these copies stored somewhere? And for instance, if data use a content that I have produced, I produced in the past, maybe 10 years ago, and if any AI company opens the door of the storage facilities, would I be able to find and spot my content that was used as an incoming data? So that's a very broad question. But what we want to understand as creators' representative is what happens with our contents and how are they used and processed by AI?
That's a very, very good question and a very big topic that we could spend probably hours discussing about, Benoit. So, about data sets. One of the things that I like to say for data is that in AI, data is the king. In a way, what I like to tell is that it is garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have the quality of data to train the model, then the model will not be good. That's for sure. So there is a vast effort trying to do some data cleansing, try to find the appropriate data, try to do domain-specific training. That means that For example, for the musicians, you might need to have a specific trained data set on a specific type of music in order to get the best possible data. So in a way, everything starts with data. So when the system is trained on any amount of data, large data sets, smaller data sets, because there are also smaller models actually, what it does in the background is it is creating and generating properties. This is what Dimitris mentioned, that there are systems that have, let's say, trillion of properties or billions of properties for the smaller models. So it takes, think of it as a numerical representation that gets in the memory of the model. So when you hear about, let's say, a model having 9 billion parameters, means that it has created 9 billion, let's say, inputs of the data that was used in a way. And there is also lineage, to answer your question, meaning that you can force the model in everything that it produces to mention where the data came from. And this is becoming more systematic because there are situations that you might have heard of, like hallucinations. So you need to make sure that was this quoted and mentioned, it exists somewhere, and it is written, because also there are also legal rights and the IP rights and the stuff. So everything that it is absorbed, ingested via the model has a full lineage, where it came from, actually. So to answer your question, we are talking about neural networks. So if you tell me, Benoit, okay, where is this data in the system, actually, it will be pretty difficult to find out. But reality is that data is not absorbed at a whole. For example, if you ingest a book, the book is split into chunks, into small chunks and pieces, actually. And this is how the models are working. So they're not actually absorbing the full data, they're splitting into chunks, and then they're trying to predict, they're creating sequences, and they're trying to predict actually the next chord, the next sentence, the next phrase in the sequence. So they're not absorbing data at its whole, actually. They're creating what we call embeddings. And that's part of the inference, broadly speaking, actually.
Thank you. During this session, we'll try to stay away from legal considerations and really stick to facts, because there will be other opportunities during the conference to touch to more legal aspects. But we need to understand what happens before we address them from a legal point of view. So what is your take of this, Dimitris?
Well, Yiannis said it very clearly and very rightfully. I would also add a little thing about the reproduction, because during training, what we have is learning, the machine learning the data, a vast amount of data that we feed it. And this data set usually includes, and almost all of it, copyrighted data. And this reproduction is a very critical process, of course, to the creation of the final system. So this raises some questions, but we have to say that the AI systems do not listen to the music as we do. We hear a groove and we vibe. The AI doesn't. The AI converts the music into numerical representations of musical elements, and these elements are then transformed into the connections of the neural network. So it's a chaotic process, and the musical works are not in a complete form, or even in parts of it, stored in the AI model anymore. After the training process, they are thrown out. But during the process, They are being read, and they are being used, and they are being reproduced.
Thank you. I think this is very important because the notion of reproduction and where it occurs and how long it stays in the system is fundamental. So tell me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to take a comparison. Let's say I read a sentence, I understand it, and then I forget the sentence. But because I understood the sentence, I can produce a new one based on the logic of the sentence I've read. So I just need the sentence while I am reading it, which is, so to speak, the time when the reproduction would be necessary. So I read the sentence, I view it, I learn it, I understand it, then I erase it because I don't need it anymore. Is it something like that that happens in the analysis of incoming data?
I think yes, you put it rightfully. And the process of learning a song, first of all, we must say that the artificial intelligence applications are in infancy stage right now. And we expect in the next years and the next decades far more critical applications based on AI. But yes, the interpretation of data sometimes can be wrong, sometimes can be absolutely correct, and it does not, the model does not store any information in memory cells like in classical computing. In classical computing, the system follows orders, instructions, and every information is stored in a specific memory cell. Now it's more chaotic.
If I can add something, I mean, because this is a very, very good topic, actually. So the idea is that during the training, we apply techniques like what we call reinforced learning, that I think Pavlos mentioned in the speech. So in this reinforced learning is just like learning a child and telling him how to speak. And in a way, you either tell him not to copy things, and you teach the child not to replay things and mimic things and reproduce things. And that's how exactly, that's how the systems are working, actually. If you tell the system and the model that you should not be copying something and you should be simply getting influenced by it and producing something different, then it will do it. So during the training process and the data ingestion process, actually, you apply reinforced learning in order to avoid repeating things and repeating, let's say, rhythms of or songs or parts of the music. So to your sentence, actually, if you apply reinforced learning and tell the system, instruct the system, actually, that you should not be replaying things, actually, but you should be coming with something new, then that's the idea. And that's how we should be working in order to avoid, let's say, copying things and creating music by just, let's say, composing bits and pieces that already exist, but try to repeat patterns and the look and feel, but not the song itself.
Okay, that's an important thing because, of course, from the point of view of creators, reproduction is key. Is there reproduction and how long is it being used? And we will touch upon the output in a minute. To what extent is the input going to be found in the output? So, and then, again, we won't touch upon the infringement to copyright, etc. But the notion of reproduction is important. So, again, the system has the capacity to copy, of course, but it was already the case before AI came into play. It was very easy to copy, and there were many anti-piracy campaigns developed in the 2000s because of music counterfeiting and pirate website, etc. So it's not about copying. We know that IT system can copy, and that has been the case for many, many, many years. So now it's about the place and the importance of reproduction in data analysis. So my understanding is you need a temporary reproduction just for the time necessary for the system to acquire the knowledge how to do the same thing or similar things in the future without copying the original data. Okay? Yeah. So if you will have time for questions at the end of this session this morning before the coffee break. We will try to save time for questions. So now, let's look at the other end, the output. How do you get something new on the output, and how do you get there from the input? So we have already started to, I think, understand what happens. So the system looks at the incoming data, creates new sets of knowledge, how to do the same thing. So what actually is the output? What is it? And we're talking about generative AI, not general purpose AI. We're really interested in generative AI, and especially in the field of music. So what's happening in the output? If you take an AI software like Suno or Udio or this kind of software available on the market, what's happening for the creation of output?
So you might have heard that the input actually, or an input to generative AI is what we call the prompt. And the prompt is probably one of the most important parts in the process. Prompt is the instructions that you will give the model into what type of an output will produce. And that's very important, because the more detail you add into the prompt and instruct on what you want the model to do, the better output we'll get in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So the prompt is the piece that actually instructs the model on where to look in the training corpus, what to build, in what sense, and what you expect as an output. So, for example, just to give you an example, if you say to the model that I want to build some music or some book, some science fiction book, but that actually mimics, for example, I'm an Agatha Christie fan, so I was having an experiment and I was telling the system to build an Agatha Christie-like small section, actually, that will, getting influenced by Agatha Christie, will not repeat any part of the book or of Agatha Christie's books, actually, and will come with something new, or probably something which is going to be similar to Agatha Christie. And I was waiting actually for the output, and the model, of course, it took some time actually to produce something, and the output was very, very original. I mean, it was mimicking the style. It was almost what I was expecting, actually. Was it innovative? Maybe, because you could see among the lines that there were influences from books and things that were already mentioned, but not exactly, actually. They were kind of innovative. And in a way, if I could write, let's say, a bigger prompt and a much more detailed prompt, probably would get me where I wanted. So the idea is that you create a prompt, then the system starts creating sequences, because the system does not have the context. Just gets your input and says, okay, you want to replicate, to create, let's say, an Agatha Christie book. So create a sequence and predicts the next word, simply speaking, in the sequence. And this is how it creates, let's say, the output. And of course, as mentioned, if there are any let's say, pointers or any material that was reused, it is mentioned. So that's That's the output. The output is basically tokens, broadly speaking.
Very well put. After the training process has been completed, the system has absorbed all the information that has learned in mathematical representations of the musical elements like notes and beats and riffs. And now it tries to repeat and produce based on the prompt, as Yiannis said. And it creates an output. Sometimes it is not very good, and sometimes it could be very good, depending on how good the model is, usually, and but also on the very prompt that we used. However, this process actually involves probabilities and stochastic functions. And at each point, the system tries to find the probable continuation after the previous musical elements and after the prompt. And this way of production creates something that is new. We have not heard before as that. It usually repeats a style only. It can blend and mix different styles in the same work, but it does not provide real novelty in itself.
Okay. So I think it's essential what you mentioned about the prompt, because that means the user is going to define, to a large extent, what's going to come out of the system. So let's say I'm a beginner and I was given a subscription to software for Christmas, and I want to try it. And I say, create a piece of music. So the system is probably going to do it. It's going to be an average piece of music based on the most probable combination of sounds and chords and rhythms without much interest, I suppose. So when I realize it is not very convincing, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to say, okay, create a piece of music, but I want it to be 5 minutes long, and I want it to be in the style of Mozart. I want it to be written for a quartet, and I want it to have different parts, and I want it to use such rhythm in the first part, such other rhythm in the other part, and I want to have this and this and that. So, and then I realized, okay, I have a lot of influence on this. And as a user, I'm starting to use a tool for a purpose. And of course, and there has to be terms of use for the software, and maybe the recommendation that I should follow. Because if I use it and say, okay, give me a new version of that existing recording, I want it to look exactly like this recording, with the exception of I wanted a solo trumpet at the end. So we are going to touch upon something different, which is plagiarism. So is it possible for, or is it inherent to the software to do plagiarism? If I use it and I want to plagiarize, I'm not sure it's the right verb anyway, you want to plagiarize an existing piece, is it possible to do it?
Yes, I think it is possible to plagiarize. The system that has not stored the actual information in itself. So the system cannot reproduce any original play by itself. as I cannot reproduce any original play by myself, just from having learned at some point in my life. But I can recall some things, and sometimes I can create output that is very, very similar to the training material that I had. This, however, is not the rule. This is the exception, because probabilistically speaking, we have a lot of opportunities to create new musical phrases based on the old ones and not repeating the old ones per se.
So if plagiarism-wise, actually, so we have two ways to see it, and how we deal it. There is a proactive way, and there's the reactive way. In the proactive way, we have what, for example, there are companies like Microsoft that we have what we call responsible AI, and amongst one of the things that we do actually is that we're trying to avoid such implications and complications, if I say. But at the end of the day, this is about, we're talking about humans, and have in mind that there should always be a human in the loop, as we say, meaning that there will be a human, a final approval. So the reactive way actually would be what we call the guardrails, and making sure that what is coming out is authentic, is not just a copy of something else actually, and we don't allow it. So we put controls, because no matter what we do, I mean, a model and LLMs are right now thousands, so you cannot control them all, and you cannot put, let's say, a stop to humans to do plagiarism, to do whatever they like with models. Even with models that they can take on their own and they can build in their home computer. So it's very difficult to control this. However, when it comes to building something that is made, for example, for the music industry, you have to put the guardrails. So we have, for example, AI systems that are the guardrails of what is produced for the AI. So we have an AI that controls the AI in a way, and always the final part is the human. So think of it as like the inception. You have an AI that creates something that is controlled by an AI, but the final saying is for the human. And that's how it works.
Okay, so in short, the responsibility for the shape, style of the output is eventually with the human who provides the prompt. Okay, so you can't. Then we couldn't say that the software is by design a tool that is meant to. I don't want to enter into a legal debate here, so I'm trying to find the right approach. It is not designed to create contents that are directly reproducing input data, in the sense that what would be? Do you think it is more interesting for an AI system to produce something new or to produce something that already exists?
The system does not have, the model does not have any interest. It does not feel. It's not a composer, actually. It's a system that you put something, it's a tool, as you mentioned, actually. But that doesn't mean that humans cannot create a tool, actually, that will be used for such a purpose. For example, we have the cybersecurity threats, and the fact that we have systems and LLMs and models actually that are used for malicious use. So you see that even producing a model and creating a model, actually, humans are in the loop for the good and for the bad, actually. So I said the system on its own is built with the intentions that the creator had by that time. And that's the full idea. We create the model in the way that we want. That's why I'm saying that human is in the loop, both in the input and also in the output, and we're responsible for what we build and for what we create, actually. The system is just a tool. It doesn't have a life. It's not like a composer, actually, that has a life and produces, let's say, themes and music based on his life experiences. No, the model is a tool. It can create infinite, let's say, sequences that the composer could use and could, let's say, be his style or what he wanted.
Okay, thank you. I think we've covered input and output, and I'm sure there will be questions following this presentation. Let's touch briefly upon the hardware resources. And we already said that one element of the rise of AI a few years back was the availability of powerful computational chips, graphical chips, etc. So from a hardware point of view, and we know that there are immense, enormous, huge
data centers.
Yeah, where the AI models rely upon. So intuitively, I would say probably they rely on storage capacities and computation capacities. And that will lead us maybe to the cost structure, because I suppose the main costs come from developing this storage and computation capacities, maintaining them, providing energy, etc. So what would be, in your view, the respective shares of storage and computation in the AI functioning from a hardware point of view?
Nowadays, for artificial intelligence, the main component are the mathematical processors. And there is a reason that NVIDIA's stock has skyrocketed. And what we can say is that a lot of computational intensive mathematical computations take place in the data centers. And this puts a very big strain on the capacity of the systems. From storage-wise, we do not have so difficult experience. And we see that the CPUs of the systems are not the bottleneck of the systems anymore for artificial intelligence. Right now, it is focused on the mathematical processors.
So the idea here is that we are having the GPUs actually, and we are using the GPUs and the systems in two ways, broadly speaking. One way is to train the models, as we pointed out, which is a very, very much compute-intense process, training vast amounts of data sets in order to get to build the model and the system and the parameters that we have mentioned. But the majority of the computation is going to what we call inference, in a way that when you type a prompt and get a response, this is the inference. And this is also a computational intense process, because think of it at a scale. There's not one human that actually typing a prompt. We're almost full of, we have tens of thousands of billions of prompts every second or every minute actually. And this is a very, very much computational intense process, and this is creating a strain into the system for GPUs and for additional capacity. And companies cannot keep up actually with the GPUs demand that Dimitris mentioned, and the NVIDIAs of the world actually. And chances are that the more we will need in terms of we will use actually the systems, the more we will be needing. And it's fascinating, because there is a law called the Moore's law actually, which was predicting that the computational power will be doubling every 2 years. What is happening right now is phenomenal, because the computational power is not doubling every 2 years. It's doubling every, let's say, 6 months, which we have not seen in the past. And the demand is going to be huge, both in terms of resources and materials and what we're going to be needing to support AI.
Okay, so just to have an idea, most of the, maybe not most, but I mean the general public uses AI a lot as a free service. And a lot of AI bots, chatbots, can provide some of the service for free. If you want to go further, you have individual subscriptions for about $20 per month, which is relatively cheap. And then if you go to the next step, it's going to be maybe 10 times more. And I suppose for enterprise intensive users, it's going to be even more expensive. But let's say when I pay these $20 per month, what do I pay for? I pay for a service, that's very clear. But what costs does it cover on the AI side? Is it hardware? Is it R&D? Is it interface? What is it?
It is actually scary if we try to decompose the cost and what is underneath that cost, because reality is that it's not only GPUs and only hardware. This is a significant part of the investment, of course, but think of it as it's hardware, it's data sets and how data set cleansing. So you're using data scientists to do the data cleansing, is about paying royalty rights and fees actually to for the data sets, because not everything is free. It is, of course, electricity. I mean, you require an awful lot of electricity. It's about cooling, it's about R&D, designing the new models or improving the new models. For example, OpenAI is producing a new version of the model every year, let's say. Microsoft is producing its own model, so this has cost, actually. And of course, it's the cost of the architecture and building the architecture that the AI systems rely upon. And this is a very, very sophisticated, highly sophisticated and complex architecture in a way. So it's a bundle of things, if I can call it, actually. And plus, think of it, for the hardware, for example, there's also the depreciation value. So something that you buy you buy a GPU now, and probably in a year's time, the depreciation value is huge. So you have to anticipate for it as well. So that's the breakdown in a nutshell.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I think we should start taking questions now. So I'm going to take a first one here. Yeah.
Thanks for a wonderful conversation. You've held an audience captive for a lot of minutes, trying to make sense and trying to understand. And I wonder if Benoit finally found his song, written in 2022, while he was living in Gaza. There's nothing there. He lost all his papers and whatever recordings he has. He's been running back and forth and looking for that song. Can he make it up? Can he make it up by remembering what he did then?
Yeah. So yes, it was a hypothesis that I created a song, and I was just wondering if I could find it in any storage facility of the AI companies. So, do you think I could?
There are two ways. If you can find the song in the storage facilities, or you can recreate the song in a way. Probably you're asking the latter, if you can recreate. Both, okay. So, find the song. I think it would be really, really difficult, to be honest. But recreating the song is a very interesting approach, because if you can actually think, remember what we discussed about the prompting, actually, and the prompt, actually. So if you can create a prompt in a way that you describe the system, how the song looked like, and what were the influences, For example, if there is a specific pattern, and if there is any specific scene that you remember of, or something that you could describe it in writing, in the prompt actually, then you could probably give it a try. Of course, the first output will probably not be what we were looking for, but what you can do and what we are doing is reiterating in a way, and we are revising, up until we get to a point that we say, okay, that's it. And not only for recreating your song, but also building something new. Would be difficult, of course, because trying to describe what you feel and what you have in mind in sentence is always difficult, and sometimes it's very, very difficult actually, but chances are that you might be able to replicate it in a way. Everything is about prompting and about giving instructions to the system to what you expect for.
So I have many questions. I think there was Laurent over there.
Thank you, Benoit. Is it possible to have a question about legal aspects at this stage of the conference? It's about the big amount of data that AI systems need to train the models, and one of the main questions is, if I'm a right holder, how can I know, is it possible for you to give me information about the question of is my work used? Is it in the data set? And is it possible for you to give me information? Yes, your work or your interpretation is in the data set, and because in the big amount of data, sometimes we heard that it's not possible to identify everyone, you know, and it's one of the big questions of transparency, and also to know what's the value of the data at different stages of the using of the data. You mentioned also sometimes the data use can be more focused on certain data. So can you tell us something about what it's possible technically? I am clear about that?
Yeah, so you want to know if the AI company can give you the list, if your works are in the list of the data that are being used to train a machine?
Yes, it's the problem of the template, you know, in the
Yes.
directive.
Yeah.
But perhaps it's too early to have a conversation about that. I don't know.
I think that's a relevant question. We can deal with it.
It's very difficult to find out ourselves from the trained model if a certain musical piece of if a certain musical piece has been used in the data set. We cannot know for sure unless we happen to come upon one of the very rare cases that the system creates something based on well-crafted prompts to replicate some of the old data as only a part of that. We have to think that the models, the artificial intelligence models, use neurons in a way very simplistically and very loosely derived from the way that our brain works. So if I have heard at some place and I have learned a song among thousands, millions of songs, it could not be easy to replicate this to you. And this is, I think, what we have with the models. Now, it's a different thing if the companies that create the models should be open about what data sets they use. But I'm afraid that we cannot be sure that something was used in the training process.
So if I can say, if I can extend what Dimitris is mentioning, there are two ways to see things, actually. One thing is the data set itself, because this is probably what you're mentioning, to see if your song, for example, or your book is included in the data set, and that's one thing. So at least for the enterprises that are producing models, actually, and they're using huge amounts of data, actually, for everything that it is copyrighted and it's needed approval, written approval or any form of approval, actually, then you have to give consent. Otherwise, the data will not and should not be used unless you pay fees or you agree that you will be using your model. But there is a big but. We are talking about enterprises. However, a model can be something that you might not use, let's say ChatGPT or Copilot or an enterprise LLM, but you decide that you take a copy of a model, it's open source, and you train it or you fine-tune it with any data you like. I mean, you can create a data set, I can create a data set actually and use anything that I like, because I want, for example, to create something domain-specific, like a music LLM that will provide me with music. Enterprise speaking, actually, you need to have consent on copyrighted things. However, this is a vast playground of everybody can create their own LLM and have their own data sets, and of course do reuse things without consent, because at the end of the day, this is a home LLM, if I can call it.
Yeah, I'm afraid that would open a separate debate about the consent, because I don't think this is the rule for the time being, that consent is based on consent. It's rather, at least in some regions, it's based on opposition. If you opt out, then we will not use your content. But it would be a subject for a separate panel, so I don't want to enter this debate now. So I have many questions. I tried to take all of them, so I want you to be brief, and if you can, introduce yourself when asking the question. I have Irene over there, and then I have Mr. Ganesha here, and I've seen other hands. Yeah, Chris.
We also have questions from online participants.
And questions from online participants. So, Irene.
Hi, Irene from Costa Rica. So my question is that if you know if and when the human input is not going to be necessary anymore, if you have calculated that at a certain year it may evolve in a way that human input and prompts are not going to be necessary, and also the outcome, the outputs are not going to be human influence necessary, and if you have projected when?
That's a very, very interesting question, actually, and I'm afraid it's difficult to provide an answer. However, I mean, I came across a couple of papers quite recently. For example, there was a paper that was the scientists were trying to create what we called an AI scientist, meaning that they wanted to create a model, a system, an AI system actually, that will do end-to-end innovation on drugs and new things. End-to-end, I mean, create a hypothesis, validate the hypothesis, read the corpus, do the analysis, do the runs, and then iterate on its own without any human interaction. If you ask me, and what we should be doing as a society and as a species, is that humans should always be seen in the loop, even if the system is capable of doing, because at the end of the day, we are responsible for what we produce, not the system. The system is just a tool. So it's very welcome if you can support us, if you can extend our work, but the end approval and the end stake should be with humans. If we can bypass this, I would think that at some point, yes, it's like the autonomous cars, actually. Right now, we have the hands on the steering wheel, but pretty soon there will be nothing, no one riding the car. However, the human within the car will be responsible for whatever is caused in the accident. So if you ask me, this loop should not be broken in any way, and we should be part of the process and of any process. Systems might be capable in a couple of years, 10, 15 years, who knows. However, do we have the surrounding legislation? What about the ethics? This is getting a very, very big discussion if we remove humans from the loop.
Thank you. For the sake of efficiency, I will direct the questions to one of the two speakers, so we're not able to take answers from everyone. So I have Mr. Ganesha here.
Thank you. So very briefly, you mentioned 2 times that these are tools. And here we are in an audience of musicians, and when they use musical instruments, they don't say they are tools, but this is a little bit different. Don't you think that in case of our new language model, new AI, generative AI technique, these are more instruments and tools in a way that, so you have some ability to generate some prompt and you generate something, which is a little bit different. So this is maybe a philosophical question about this.
I'm not surprised coming from a philosopher has this kind of question. So who wants to take the question? Maybe Dimitris?
This morning we had very nice instruments there, and we cannot say these are tools. I don't think so. But maybe you think these are tools. I don't think. But you are also a musician, so you can answer to this.
Yeah, in this discussion today, we have focused on the generative AI systems and the bigger ones. However, for many years, we have tools that embed AI in order to accomplish the facilities that we want. Right away, from mastering to sound design, we use AI tools. And month to month, the AI tools get better and get everywhere. And that's not specific to the music industry, not to the musicians. It happens in all fields. So I believe it will be a tool for the musicians and for the performance and for the composers. And right now we see that our services specifically for that, generative AI services. And we think that as the legislation comes up, this will be expanded.
Oh, you wanted to say something?
Just one thing, because the question is very interesting, actually, about if it's an instrument or a tool, actually. So the question here is that, can the AI system produce something unique as a sound? Then it is an instrument, isn't it? That's the idea, actually. I can't say that I have seen it, but if there's something new and innovative can be produced as a sound, then it's also a tool and an instrument. Basically, right now, it's a tool, of course, but maybe in 2 or 3 years, there will be new sound coming out. So maybe it's both.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to take one question from the floor, and then I will attempt to take questions that have been put online. If Dinos can maybe come to me and yes. So Chris, and yes, please be brief for the sake of time because we only have 7 minutes left or so.
Just one question for Yiannis. Microsoft in particular has been in the press buying the rights on some level in a confidential agreement, so we don't really know exactly what happened to the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. You'll remember that from the China syndrome, probably. It's the site of the worst commercial nuclear disaster in America, and that will be that power that plant generates, because as I understand it, you're going to bring one back online, will be exclusive to Microsoft. for its data centers. So given that you mentioned electricity and the demand for electricity, this is an issue that's going to keep coming up. And President Trump has said that the AI companies will be able to build nuclear plants on federal land, and then they'll just sell back whatever the excess is, you know? Except I don't think there's going to be any excess. I think it's going to go the other way. I think that there's probably going to be a draw from the commercial side in addition to these private plants. So could you just speak a little bit to that? I mean, in terms of the electricity needs for data centers and how that's going to affect sort of everyday citizens and ratepayers in utilities around the world, because there's a phenomenal number of data centers out there.
Indeed, there are an awful lot of data centers, actually, not only by Microsoft, but by Google, by everyone in the game, actually. And I recently read in the news that in the next coming years, actually, OpenAI is building their own plants, actually, and they're going to be needing roughly around 20, if I'm not mistaken, nuclear reactors, actually, to operate these GPUs and these data centers, which I think the increase is exponential in terms of electricity needs, and I don't have the answer of what would be needed and how it will affect actually the overall ecosystem and us as humans. But there is a big but here, is that as we learn new things and new ways to innovate with AI, actually, and we decide that maybe we don't need all that new models, new big models, huge models, and that are doing lots of things, but we need what we call smaller models, like the SLMs, that consume less, actually, need less data sets, and are much more energy effective. So think of it like the human brains, actually. We have the human brains that we don't use our full capacity just to choose what to wear this morning. Okay, maybe sometimes we do, but reality is that we use, let's say, 10% of our capacity, or 5%. Otherwise, it will not be energy efficient, our brains. And this is what we're trying to do, what the companies are trying to do. Mimic the brain in a way that will be energy efficient and not utilize the full, let's say, spectrum of capacities of the big LLMs, actually, but utilize smaller ones. And there is a very nice paper describing a new approach, like hierarchical reasoning instead of chain of thoughts that we have right now, which means that we split tasks into smaller chunks and we consume less, broadly speaking. We don't have time, so that's a quick review for you.
Thank you. So is there any question from online participants?
Well, as a courtesy to our online participants, now over 800 with us, I had to cherry pick a small number from the many very interesting questions we received. I will post here 3 of them and just pick one. The first one is, how do you ensure data pipelines remain ethical and unbiased through the development cycle? The second one is, what are the main challenges you face when integrating AI into legacy infrastructure? The third one is, do you believe AI should have built-in moral frameworks, or should ethics always remain human-mediated? And the last one from me, as we come across a term these days called unlearning of the machine, could you please tell us if unlearning is feasible when we're talking about intelligences? Thank you.
So who wants to talk about unlearning or untraining? And I remember many artists or many artist representatives saying, well, my contents have been used, I wasn't there to give approval, I don't want them to be used, but now it's too late. Is it possible to untrain the machine and say, remove my contents from whatever the machine has learned from me because I was not aware and I do not agree?
Okay, let me try to touch upon the last part. I don't remember the exact of the other ones. I have short memory compared to the AI. So I'll start with the unlearning part. There is a process in LLM called fine-tuning or custom tuning. So in a way, if you want for a system to either learn new things or specific things or think of things differently, actually, then that might be an unlearning process in a way that you train the system to behave differently and they give different responses because either you don't like the responses, they are not accurate, or you don't want to include actually things that you don't want to be included for numerous reasons. So I would bet upon fine-tuning if I can answer the question.
Fine-tuning, what do you mean? Because my concern is, as an artist, I know the machine has used my content, and I was not aware of it. So now I want you to tell your machine to remove my content from its knowledge. So I'm sure in the future the machine will not do anything that would use my contribution. Is it possible to go backwards once the machine has learned from me?
I wouldn't say backwards, it can go backwards, but fine-tuning means that the models are creating properties, parameters, billions of parameters. But you can retrain the system in a way in order to not include parameters or parts of the parameters that were probably on the system. That's the best interpretation that I can give you.
Okay. In theory, at least, that would be to some extent possible. Not removing the content because it's not there anymore, but the knowledge that was derived from the content.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And again, it depends on the model. For example, it will be much more difficult for models that have trillions of parameters, if you can think of. That's why I've mentioned at the beginning that the data sets, there is some process called data cleansing, and you make sure that you don't include coding that has rights and stuff. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure we have enough time to address any other questions. So I think I learned a lot from this session. I hope everyone did. I want to thank very much our two speakers, your great contributions. I hope we have a better understanding of the mechanics of AI, what happens under the hood, and it will help for the future sessions today and tomorrow. It will help also design relevant policies that better protect performers and other creators. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.